A few days ago, Jerome Powell gave an interview on 60 Minutes, a proper masterclass in gaslighting with doublespeak. Having said there were a couple gems in there that set the media aflutter. One was Jerome finally confessing that, quote, the federal government is on an unsustainable fiscal path, as in our federal deficits are getting to the point of destabilizing the entire financial system, as well as bankrupting our grandkids. Of course, it would have been super if Jerome had realized this before he spewed out $6 trillion of freshly printed dollars, almost 1 in 4 in existence at the time, which led to the worst inflation crisis since the 1970s. Still, it is rare for Fed chairs to criticize federal spending at all. Not because trillion-dollar deficits are harmless. Fed chairs know full well that every dollar the government spends makes the productive economy smaller. No, the reason Fed chairs keep quiet is they know who butters their bread, and it ain't voters. After all, the president appoints Fed members, Congress confirms them, and the people only have the illusion of control, given that elections are largely bought. Now, in case you're hoping Powell's criticism heralds a new honest Fed, it does not. Because his next shtick was how the Fed didn't really cause inflation after all. It just sort of happened because COVID. Next, Powell talked about the banks. After being asked about the Fed's failure to even monitor Silicon Valley Bank, which you'll recall actually had a Federal Reserve official on their board, presumably providing regulatory immunity since they all play golf together. Now, Powell, to his credit, admitted that they failed. Of course, that won't change anything. In the same interview, he cooed how banking troubles are, quote, manageable. Since any failed regionals will just get bought by bigger banks, that will be the clip at the next catastrophic bank crash. As for the Fed's role in these constant bank crashes, we just had another near crash last week in New York. Powell was mum on the Fed's interest rate yo-yos that are crashing banks, as well as those regulatory relationships that keep the problems hidden. Just promises that he will try harder next time. It's worth noting the Fed was also very forthright in admitting that it screwed up 2008, while Jerome himself admitted they screwed up transitory inflation with the memorable quote, I think we now understand how little we understand inflation. So the Fed breaks everything it touches, it happily admits it, and yet nothing changes. So what is next? Brought to you by Unchained.com. Sadly, what wasn't asked during the interview was whether the Federal Reserve should exist. If a central planning, politicized water carrier for the regime that habitually destabilizes the economy and crashes the financial system might not actually be a good thing. Particularly one that deceives the American people while enabling Wall Street and the federal government to rob Americans to the tune of several $trillion. Of course, those kinds of questions are probably above the pay grade of 60 Minutes, but perhaps one day Jerome Powell will actually face a tough questioner who makes him tell us why we shouldn't put the miserable, incompetent, corrupt Federal Reserve out of business. A fresh episode of the podcast roundup just went up. Check it out at petersanage.com. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.